Cuba isn't just another tropical island in the Caribbean. It's a geological treasure chest, a climate crossroads, and a land whose shapes, soils, and seas have been constantly molding its history, culture, and strategic importance. When you look at Cuba on a map, you see a long, slender island archipelago stretching more than 1,200 kilometers from west to east. But beneath that elegant outline lies a story of ancient rocks, soaring mountains, lush plains, and a coastline as unpredictable as the sea itself. Today we're going to unravel the hidden geography of Cuba, why it is so unique, how its land was forged, and what that terrain says about its past and its possible future. Let's begin with Cuba's position in the world. The main island lies just south of the Tropic of Cancer, between latitudes 19 degrees and 24 degrees north. To its north is the Atlantic Ocean, to its south the Caribbean Sea, to the west the Gulf of Mexico, and to the east lie the other islands of the Greater Antilles. It's not just a big island, it's the largest island in the Caribbean, covering some 110,860 square kilometers. Alongside the main island, Cuba includes the Isla de la Juventud, Isle of Youth, and a scattering of over 1,000 cays and smaller islets. One of the first things that hits you about Cuba's geography is how much of it is surprisingly flat. Around two-thirds of the island consists of gently rolling plains. These plains are historically fertile, forming the backbone of Cuba's agricultural economy. Sugarcane fields, tobacco farms, livestock grazing lands, all sprawling across lowland terrain. But don't think that means Cuba lacks dramatic terrain, because in the southeast, mountains rise sharply and change everything. The most rugged mountain range is the Sierra Maestra, running along Cuba's southeastern coast. Here, Pico Turquino breaks through at nearly 1,974 meters, the highest point on the island. These mountains are ancient, deeply forested, and steep, and they have shaped everything from climate patterns to historic guerrilla warfare routes. On their slopes, the terrain folds into valleys, ridgelines, and sometimes dramatic cliffs that plunge almost directly into the Caribbean Sea. But that's not all. Cuba's orography is more like a mountain patchwork. In the western part of the island, you have the Guanaguanico Massif, which stretches for about 180 kilometers. This includes mountain ranges like the Sierra de los Órganos and the Sierra del Rosario, which are formed of limestone and other ancient rock layers. The landscape in places like Viñales Valley, found in that region, is especially striking, carved by limestone into steep-sided mogotes, which are those characteristic rounded hills that rise dramatically from the flat valley floor. In the central part of Cuba, you'll find the Sierra de Escambray, also called the Guamujaya Mountains. That's where Pico San Juan stands at 1,140 meters. These mid-island highlands have their own microclimates, forests, and caves. Historically, they were remote, difficult to access, and turned into hideouts during conflicts, but they're also ecological hotspots. Further east, you encounter the Nipisagua-Baracoa Massif, a long, narrow mountain range with serpentine geology, karst hills, plateaus, and the incredibly biodiverse Sierra Cristal. So where did all this ruggedness come from? Geologically speaking, Cuba is a fascinating mosaic. The western and central parts of the island are dominated by an orogenic belt, mountains formed by massive collisions in the folding of ancient rocks. Some of these rocks date back to the Proterozoic, and that's hundreds of millions of years ago, while others are from the Jurassic or Cretaceous periods. In the east, especially around the Sierra Maestra, there's a different story: volcanic arcs and uplifted ophiolite sequences. That means bits of the deep ocean crust got shoved up onto land through intense tectonic activity. In short, Cuba is not just a Caribbean island, it's a geological palimpsest with layers of history written in rock. Of course, all that geography has a direct impact on Cuba's climate. Positioned in the tropical zone but moderated by the sea and trade winds, Cuba experiences a climate that feels lush yet volatile. Temperatures in the lowlands typically hover around 24 to 26 degrees Celsius, roughly 75 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit, while the mountains stay cooler, especially at higher elevations. Rainfall follows a seasonal rhythm, a wet season from May through October, and a relatively dry season from November to April. But the island's shape and terrain mean rainfall isn't uniform. For example, the eastern mountain ranges, like the Naipsagua-Baracoa Massif, can get over 3,400 millimeters of rain annually, while some southern low areas struggle with as little as 200 millimeters in a year. The climate also makes Cuba highly vulnerable to hurricanes. Located squarely in the path of tropical storms, the island often faces storms during the Atlantic hurricane season, June to November, and its mountainous terrain can amplify the danger. Heavy rain falling over steep slopes can cause landslides and flash floods. The geography literally shapes the risk. Moving down to the coastline, Cuba's shoreline is one of the most jagged and complex in the Caribbean. It stretches for over 3,700 kilometers, with countless bays, gulfs, coves, coral reefs, mangroves, and cliffs. This rugged coast has defined Cuba's history. Its natural harbors made Havana and Santiago de Cuba key ports, and its reefs and cays offered safe anchorages for both trade and defense. The south coast in particular has extensive mangrove swamps and coastal wetlands, while the northern shore is marked by coral platforms and sandy beaches. Under the surface, Cuba isn't just flat either. Around the island, especially off the northern and southern coasts, lies a submerged platform that extends hundreds of kilometers. That underwater shelf contributes to rich marine ecosystems, coral reefs, seagrass beds, and marine biodiversity that supports fisheries and tourism. Speaking of ecosystems, Cuba's geography fosters remarkable ecological diversity. The island is home to thousands of plant species, many of them endemic. Forests range from lowland tropical woods to pine and mahogany groves in the highlands, especially in the Sierra Maestra. Wildlife is just as diverse. The island hosts species like the Cuban trogon, the Cuban crocodile, and even the tiniest bird in the world, the bee hummingbird, all adapted to different corners of Cuba's terrain. The ecological richness is anchored in the rugged interior, where isolated mountains and karst hills, those mogotes, act as refuges for rare and specialized species. Water is another key piece of the puzzle. Despite being an island, Cuba doesn't have huge navigable rivers. Of the hundreds of small streams crisscrossing the land, only two are truly navigable: the Cauto River, which runs in the southeast, and the Sagua La Grande in the central part of the island. The Cauto, in particular, is deeply tied to agricultural areas, moving water through lowlands that support sugarcane and other crops. Geology also influences Cuba's mineral riches. The island hosts major deposits of nickel, cobalt, iron ore, and even petroleum in offshore basins. These resources are not uniform. They cluster in certain geological belts, like in the ophiolitic zones, making Cuba a significant player in certain global resource markets. That's not just a footnote, it's a meaningful part of its economic geography. Another fascinating piece, Cuba's karst topography. In places like the Viñales Valley, mogotes rise like giant limestone towers from the flat plains. These formations are not just beautiful, they tell a deep story of water erosion, ancient seas, and limestone dissolution over millions of years. Within those mogotes, caves open up. Caverns like Cueva del Indio remind you that beneath this island, there is as much mystery underground as there is above. Cuba's geography has also shaped its human story. Historically, the fertile plains became sugarcane fields, the backbone of the colonial and post-colonial economy. The mountains served as hideouts. Revolutionaries used the rugged terrain to their advantage, and remote valleys were refuges. The jagged coastline made Cuba a maritime power and a link in trading routes. Terrain influenced where people settled: coastal cities, port towns, highland farming communities. But geography hasn't just shaped history, it continues to shape Cuba's future. Climate change, for example, poses a real threat. Rising sea levels could inundate low coastal areas, mangrove swamps, and coral-fringed islands. Meanwhile, hurricanes may become more intense, hitting mountain slopes with more rain and increasing landslide risk. The mountains that once gave Cuba strength could become liability if deforestation or extreme storms destabilize slopes. On the flip side, Cuba's terrain could offer resilience. Its mountainous regions, Remote highlands and forests might act as buffers, absorbing climate shocks. The interior could become refuge zones for wildlife, and ecotourism could grow in those rugged, hard-to-reach places. Strategically, the diversity of ecosystems and geology gives Cuba options, not just vulnerabilities. Exporting its natural resources continues to be part of the story. With its nickel and cobalt reserves, Cuba could strengthen its role in global supply chains, especially as demand for batteries and green technology rises. But there's a balance to be struck, exploiting resources without destroying the ecological landscapes that make Cuba so unique. Then there's urban geography, Havana, Matanzas, Santiago de Cuba. These cities hug bays, cliffs, and plains in ways that feel organic to the land. The shape of the coastline dictated their development, trade networks, and even culture. That's geography literally built into the urban fabric. When you map out Cuban geography, you also see how interconnected everything is. Geology influences mountains, which shape climate, which determines ecosystems, which feed the economy, which influences people, which affects policy. It's a chain reaction. That's why Cuba's geography isn't just background, it's central to its identity. But this island is not static. Geologists still debate aspects of its past, how the orogenic belts formed, the timing of uplift, and how sea level changes carved the modern coastline. It's a living laboratory. For scientists, the mogotes, the ophiolites, the limestone caves, they're not just scenic, they're records, archives in stone. Then on the human side, geography influences how Cuba positions itself in the 21st century geopolitically. Geography literally designs the way people build and live. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more deep dives made simple. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. See you in the next one.